Alrighty guys, busy day as usual here on the channel. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's just make sure everything is hunky-dory over on the old YouTube. Alright. So, I apologize for that. So, great to have you along. We're going to be doing some more of our Sentinels of the Multiverse tutorial series. We're working on every single hero in the game, then every villain, and then the environments. We're going through and talking about and showing off every single card, talking about how they play, and then giving you my opinion on how easy or difficult they are to play, if they're fun, if they're interesting, or if they're just kind of generic, I guess is the best way to put it. In this episode, we're moving on to the Vengeance expansion, which came out in 2014, 2013, 2014, 2015, somewhere around there. And there was 5 heroes that was released with this. K.N.Y.F.E, the Sentinels, the Naturalists, Setback, and Parse. In my opinion, and this is just my little old opinion, these were probably the 5 worst characters that were released. None of these characters, they all had some kind of theme with them, but I think it was more about the new Vengeance mechanics and facing off against multiple bosses and doing that whole thing, and they put all their efforts into that instead of designing super cool, neat heroes. The Naturalist is kind of interesting with his moving to crocodile and rhino and gazelle form, which is kind of interesting, but I find K.N.Y.F.E to be extremely boring. I'm just going to say that right up front. She has melee knife daggers, and so she gets extra bonus when she does melee, extra bonus when she does knife, and extra bonus when she does energy. And that's pretty much all she does, is tries to get out, oh, I can do extra points of damage with melee. Oh, I can do extra points of energy damage. Oh, I can do extra points of knife damage. It's like, I just find her extremely kind of boring, to be honest. Let's look at her. Let's go. All right. Well, it would help if I was ready to go, and I am. There I am. Alrighty. So there is K.N.Y.F.E, which stands for Kinetic Neutralizer Yielding Flawless Execution Paige Huntley. Her group affiliation is formerly Filter, and we will look at her backstory. Again, you can pause this if you're watching later on YouTube. Speaking of which, there we go. All right. So there it is. And then, as we talked about, there is a variant which might have some different little bit of story with it. Let's go and show you the cards. You can see she only has 14 different cards in her deck. Not a lot of different cards. A lot of these cards, there's 3 different cards that have 4. And there's 4 different cards that have 3. So you're not getting a lot of variability with her, again, which is another reason I'm not a big fan of hers. But let's look at her. She comes with 30 hit points, which is pretty decent, actually. I would say anything that's 30 and above is pretty decent. She has the Energy Lance. Surprise, surprise. She deals 1 target, 2 energy damage. That's pretty good, actually, for a power if you're looking for somebody that can do some damage. 2 points of damage as a default power is pretty good, and if you can ramp that up, you can start doing a little bit more damage. Her backside, obviously, is going to be 1 hero may use a power, 1 hero may play a card and destroy an ongoing card. Very generic. Nothing going on there. And even the back artwork on this looks kind of generic. Nothing like super cool or interesting, in my opinion. And then if we look at the variants, we have K.N.Y.F.E Rogue Agent, 29 hit points, so less hit points. Infiltration, reveal the bottom card of a deck. Either put it into play or discard it. I mean, you don't know what's on the bottom of a deck usually. There are some cards that you might be able to put on the bottom of decks, so you might know what certain cards are. I mean, that's kind of for a power. You're not doing any damage. You may be putting a card into play or using a card. Okay, so I mean, it's got some niche uses on there. So that is the only two variants that I have unlocked. Again, there might be other variants that I don't have unlocked. Let's get into her cards. 3 copies of Amplified Combatant. It's a one-shot. She deals 3 targets, 1 melee damage, and 1 energy damage. And that's important because, again, if she does extra melee damage or extra energy damage, that would be increased. 3 targets, 1 melee, 1 energy, and of course, that also comes into play if she's using Legacy's bonus or any other bonus from any of the other heroes that's giving like +1 damage or whatever. So if she's working with Legacy, she's doing 3 targets, 2 melee, and 2 energy damage right off the bat. So that's, that's pretty good. 3 targets, 4 damage each. That's 12 damage. That's a good start to getting things done. 3 copies of that. Next up, Battlefield Experience. Ongoing. When this card is destroyed, you may draw 1 card and play 1 card. Power. Knife deals 1 target, 2 melee damage, and 2 energy damage. Then destroy this card. So, not a bad... You get 4 copies of this. You put it into play. Then you activate it sometime to use the power. You're doing 2 and 2 damage. Hopefully you're holding on to this so you can get your bonuses out there. And then you get to draw and play another card. So that's not bad either. Anytime you get to draw and play cards, we know how important that is. 4 copies of this in their deck. Next up, Energy Burn. 1-shot. Knife deals 1 target, 3 energy damage. Okay, not bad. If the target has 10 or more hit points, Knife deals it 2 energy damage. So again, you don't see this in any other character that we've come across so far, as I recall off the top of my head, but doing extra damage against a villain that has a lot of hit points. So that's the one thing, I guess, that makes her kind of a little unique, is that, okay, if she's going up against the villain, and the villain usually has... 150, 200 hit points or whatever, she's going to be able to do a little bit more damage to it. So that's not bad. That's not bad at all. 3 copies of that card in her deck. Next up, Flawless Execution. Ongoing limited. Whenever damage dealt by knife, reduce a target to 1 hit point to destroy the target. So it's basically she does 1 extra hit point of damage because, I mean, if she's doing 4 and it's got 5, it's going to die. So it's just like she did 5 hit points anyways. That is a very niche. How many times do you get an enemy down to exactly 1 hit points? Again, not very often. And there are, how many cards of this in her deck? There are only 2. So it's not a whole bunch of a wasted time. But yeah, I mean... kind of one of her 14 cards is very situational. Next up, 4 copies of Focusing Conduit Blade. Equipment limited. Increase energy damage dealt by knife by 1. So this is very important to her. Anytime she does energy damage, she's going to do it 1 extra. After this card is destroyed, you may play an equipment card. And then knife deals 1 target, 3 energy damage, and destroy this card. So put it into play, doing extra damage, get her an item that you want to get into play, and then you use this power to get that item into play. 4 copies of this. So you can cycle through this and get a couple copies of this pretty easily. 3 copies of For the Greater Good. 1-shot. Knife deals herself 3 psychic damage. If she takes damage this way, you may draw a card, play a card, and use a power. So it is quite a quite an expensive 3 points of damage. It's nothing to sneeze at, especially if she's getting any buffs from any Legacy or anybody else. She could be doing extra damage to herself because this is not fixed damage. So 3 psychic damage is, it's a pretty good chunk. It's 1/10 of her total hit points. But drawing a card, playing a card, and using a power, if it's something you need to get out and do right away, yeah, I could see you doing that. But 3 copies of this card seems a little obsessive. Next up, Incidental Contact. 1 shot. Knife deals each target 1 energy damage. Knife deals each target 1 energy damage. And then Knife may deal any target dealt damage this way an additional energy damage. So she hits everyone and everything. Good guys, bad guys, you name it. If it's got hit points, he hits it all. And then she can do extra damage to the bad guys, but she's also going to be hurting her teammates as well. So obviously you only want to do this if there's a whole bunch of enemies in play. And everyone on your team has a lot of hit points or some kind of healing. And again, this is energy damage, so she has her battle. No, not that one. No, that's not it. Energy burn. Is it energy burn? Yeah. So no, that's not it either. This one. Increased energy damage by knife by 1. So she has her focusing conduit blade in play. So this is going to do this one. 2 energy damage to everyone, and then she can increase an additional energy damage. So that's not 2 separate instances of energy damage, so she wouldn't get the bonus twice to energy damage. So if she has her bonus out, she's doing 2 energy to everyone, and then she can deal an extra 1 to all the bad guys out there. So hopefully there's like 8 bad guys. She's got 3 copies of that card. Infrared and Obfuscated. Ongoing Unlimited. There are 2 cards of this card. There are 2 copies of this card. The first time, Knife would be dealt damage by an environment target each turn. You may redirect that damage to a villain target with the second highest hit points. Which is, again, a very niche power because you need to have the enemy having somebody else out there. The villain has to have one of his minions out there or some kind of target for you to hit. Now, most of them do, but there are some that don't use minions or very few minions. Which means Knife is best to go first after the boss, so that all the other people in the group don't end up killing all the minions in the group. So she's one of the characters, have the villain, then Knife, then all of her allies, then the environment turn. So redirecting it to the second highest damage on the villain target. So again, she can't even decide which target to send it to. It's got to be the target with the second highest. So that's kind of situational again when you're trying to, if you got 2 or 3 baddies out there and you have to take care of one of them before, because maybe you got one baddie that's being protected by another baddie or he's reducing the damage you're doing by him. This doesn't really help that much. It's very, very situational again. And there are 2 copies in their deck. 2 copies of Kinetic Neutralizer. Ongoing Limited. Increased damage dealt by Knife to the villain target with the highest hit points by 1. So, yes, great, because this also comes into play with her doing extra damage against the villain with the most, if it has 10 or more hit points after she does her damage. So if it also has the most hit points, it's going to do an extra point of damage. So Knife is pretty good at doing damage to the boss or the villain. Only 2 copies of this card in her deck. Next up is 2 copies of Overcharged Null Shield. Equipment Limited. Reduce damage dealt to Knife by the villain target with the highest hit points by 1, which is great. When the villain actually does damage, she takes less damage. Not a lot of them do damage, and a lot of them do damage through other means, other cards in play, and, everything else, and they don't actually do physical damage themselves. So again, Knife is very situational. And then power, draw 2 cards and destroy this card. So for only having 2 copies in her deck, sure, she can get more cards into her hand, but you're wasting your power to do that. It doesn't seem like a power to draw 2 cards is that good to me compared to a lot of the other heroes out there. Next up, 3 copies of Overdo It. It's an ongoing limited card. At the start of your turn, you may play a card. At the end of your turn, Knife may deal herself 2 psychic damage. If she does not take damage this way, destroy this card. So 2 damage to play an extra card. Okay, cool, but you have to have cool cards to use. If you've seen most of her cards so far, there's only 3 cards we haven't seen. She has a lot of nice one-shots to do some damage, but besides that, is there any card that you have to get into play immediately? I don't see. I mean, obviously getting her extra energy damage, and there's another one coming up that will give her extra damage with that as well, but 2 damage just so she can play an extra power seems a little aggressive. Next up, 3 copies of Primed Punch. Ongoing. At the start of your turn, Knife may deal 1 target 4 melee damage. If she deals damage this way, destroy this card. So it's a great way of getting ready for enemies to come out. That's just Knife's. And then it also has a power. Knife deals 1 target 1 melee damage and 1 energy damage. Which is not, it's not even that good because her base power does 2 damage by itself. So unless you've got all your buffs out that are giving you lots of buffs, 1 melee and 1 energy damage isn't any better than you're already doing. Next up, 2 copies of Prototype Servo Gauntlet. Increase melee damage by Knife by 1. So this is her other one. This is the one she would like to get out so she can do extra melee damage. So when she does her melee attacks, and then the other one is this one here, so she can increase her energy damage by 1. So she can do melee and energy damage. That's pretty good, right? So dealing extra energy damage, doing melee damage. So increase her melee damage by 1, and then Knife deals 1 target. She has a power. Knife deals 1 target, 2 melee damage. If the target is destroyed, you may destroy an ongoing card. Again, very situational. There's not too many times you're going to be killing off an enemy that's going to have 2 or maybe 3 hit points remaining with this, if she's got her buff going on. Because this will do 3 damage. Because this will increase its own point of melee damage. 3 hit points. You gotta have 3 or hit points or less to destroy an ongoing card. This could be very situational, but good again. Last but not least, 4 copies of Wrecking Uppercut. 1 shot. Knife deals 1 target, 3 melee damage, and discard the top card of the villain deck. Again, that can really come back depending on which villain you're fighting against, which environment you're fighting against. Discarding random cards off the villain deck may or may not be a good thing to be doing. It can really come back to really bite you a little bit. Oh, Cardboard Commander, got my copy of In the Shadows today. Nice. Christopher, what's going on? Phoenix Knight, draw 2 cards and destroy this card. Can be helpful for deck thinning. No, there's no deck thinning in this game. You always want as many cards as you want and can get your hands on. Always want to draw lots of cards and keep lots of cards in your hand and play them, because when the villains or the environment knock all your cards out, you can play them and get them back into play. There is no thinning. This is not a deck builder. Anyways, let's talk about Knife. So, what do I think of Knife now? As I've already said at the beginning of this episode, the 5 characters that came in Vengeance are probably the weakest and most overrated, useless characters that came in the game. I'm trying to think of any other characters that might be worse than these characters. I can't think of any right off the top of my bat. If you take these 5 characters up against any villain, you're probably going to die. That's just my opinion. These are, as you can see with Knife, she is very situational. A lot of her cards, she only has 14 cards, which is not a lot of variation in her deck. She has a lot of the same cards, so you're going to cycle through her deck pretty quickly. And she has a lot of situational cards that don't come into play at all unless certain things happen. Oh, do 1 extra point or if you damage an enemy and knock it down to 1 hit point, remove that enemy. Sure, it happens every once in a while, but not very often. Very, very situational. A lot of her cards. There's probably 4 or 5 of her cards that, I mean, you may never get them, to get the effects on. Dealing 1 extra point of melee damage and doing 1 extra point of energy damage is kind of her whole gimmick, which for me is not a gimmick. It's kind of just generic. She, for me, is very limited what she can do. She's not a lot of fun to play. She does have a lot of hit points, which is nice. And the one thing that she can kind of do is she can kind of damage the villain because she does extra damage against characters that have more than 10 hit points after she attacks them. And then she has the 1 card that'll give her extra damage against the villain with the highest hit points. So, besides that, she's just very situational when a lot of her cards may or may not come into play. She doesn't do anything special at all, just like you're trying to work on getting a couple cards so she can do 1 extra point of damage, which she ends up, incidental contact, she can end up doing a lot of damage to her teammates. So she can do a lot of damage to herself so that she can draw a card, play a card, and use a power. I can't think of a single one of her cards that I would want to cause myself 3 damage to play. She doesn't have that many really cool special cards. Like if she had a card that removed a environment or removed a villain target or removed an ongoing card or do something, then maybe I would want to do this, activate this power, but I don't. I wouldn't want to take 3 damage. Just like this for me is like dead cards in her hand. She's just got so many dead cards. She's got this 1 card that gives her 1 extra point of damage. Okay, great. Wonderful. And so you can cycle through this and activate it by destroying this card to do extra damage. So you're doing 1 extra point of damage to destroy this card, so maybe you can put another copy of this card out. That's not really a gimmick. It's just, for me, she seems very generic, not very thought out, not a lot of variation, and a lot of very situational cards. She's just not a fun character to play, in my opinion. Unfortunately, she's discarding the top card of the villain deck. Great, but what if it's something that was really weak? You've now discarded a weak card off of the villain deck. It's like random. You may or may not be doing something good. You may or may not be doing something bad. She's got 2 copies of this, so she can do 1 extra point of damage. It's like her whole gimmick is doing 1 extra point of damage. Okay, well, I mean, really, that's just not for me. I really thought really interesting, really well-rounded character compared to especially some of the other characters that weren't even in the game with the Naturalists and the Sentinels, and you're going to see a lot more at least interesting characters. For my opinion, Knife if you need somebody that does a little bit of extra damage and she can take a little bit of hit points on her, great. She doesn't have any healing. She ends up doing a lot of damage to herself, and she's got a lot of copies of cards that she destroys so she can put the same card back into play. And that's it. That's her whole gimmick. And does a little bit, 1 extra point of damage against the villain. If that 1 extra point is really that important, then bring K.N.Y.F E. Otherwise, bring a decent character and you might do something better. Yeah, not a big fan of K.N.Y.F E. Maybe you can get her to play a lot better than I can. Once we get through these 5 characters from Vengeance, we'll see if we can have a practice against one of the villains. And so you can see how well or how poorly she plays. And yeah, we'll see everyone next time. Thanks so much for watching our tutorial series on Sentinels of the Multiverse, hero number 17 now. And we'll be coming back with the other characters, which are the Sentinels, the Naturalist, Setback, and Parse. And yeah, any one of these other characters is probably better than K.N.Y.F E. She is one of my least favorite of all the characters that I've ever played in the game because she's boring. She doesn't really do anything. And a lot of her cards are very situational and they will never come into play. And you're basically putting in cards into play so you can activate the powers to put the same card into play again. It's very boring gameplay. So I have not played her. I'm not sure if she was in the Enhanced Edition. She might not be released in the Enhanced Edition, but maybe they made her better in the Enhanced Edition or Definitive Edition. Anyways, we'll see you for the next show next time. Thanks for watching. Talk to you then.